Hello and welcome to today's English Australia webinar, Scaffolding Critical Thinking, a process approach to teaching writing. This is Sophie speaking. I'm the Professional Support and Development Officer at English Australia. I know that it says Aparna Jacob is talking, and she was actually taking my place while I was away on maternity leave. Thank you, Aparna, for the great job. And I'm back now, so we'll have to get this webinar title name changed soon. I just want to ask if everybody can hear me and can see the first PowerPoint slide up on the screen. If yes, can you just type in yes? Okay, wonderful. So I've got lots of yeses coming up. That's great. And I'd just like to say that there's obviously a critical mass of people who are interested in critical thinking because there's about 70 people joining our webinar today. So that's fantastic that we have so many attendees. Our presenter today is Mark Switzer. He's a teacher at RMIT in Melbourne, and he currently teaches English for academic preparation at an advanced level. And this particular presentation was presented at our English Australia conference last year by Mark, and it was very well received, hence why we've decided to get it up and running as a webinar and share it with more people. Mark said that he became interested in critical thinking after years of teaching academic writing and thinking about ways to give concise feedback to teachers. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark Switzer.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here. And yes, as mentioned, it was well attended and well received. I trust you'll all find something useful that you can walk away with. As Sophie said, it is scaffolding critical thinking. With the process approach to writing. Now, the good news also is this can help you with speaking as well, and some of the materials are based towards the speaking element, sort of preparing students for writing. So you'll find that there's a few uses for what we're going to look at. Yes, this particular system was developed in the last year, with my focus on academic writing and a heavy amount of IELTS work that I also do. It's got some fairly positive results, and I'll just collect a little bit of information from everyone here. Now, perhaps, Sophie, if you can launch here it is, yes. So if you can select the area that you primarily work in, it just might help me get an idea of who's here, and what language might be more appropriate.
Okay, the votes are still coming in.
Great.
All right.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So can everybody see the poll results? So 55% of people EAP, 8% IELTS, 25% general English, 5% other exam, and 8% other non-exam courses.
Okay, great. Predominantly EAP, some general, and this may help a little bit there. Definitely going to help with IELTS and EAP and likely other exams. Now I will refer a few times to the Common European Framework Reference System. So I'll be talking about C1, B2, and of course the IELTS equivalent, which is that sort of that warm zone in the IELTS exam for band score 7, 7.5, and 8, the ever elusive scores there. I'm sure you guys are familiar with these. So let's see. Just trying to see if I can get my slides to move. Nope. Okay, Sophie, I'm just having a bit of difficulty moving my slides. Oh, there we go. It's moved. All right, so the common challenges, especially in the context in which I work, is these two areas: the task 2 of the IELTS exam, that's the academic essay, and the academic writing tasks. Now, as I said, this should apply to other areas as well, especially exam preparation if you're doing TOEFL or CAE. So that shouldn't be too much of an issue. Now, moving ahead, the focus here will be on critical thinking and particularly how that is applied to body paragraphs. There we are. Now, just we all know how to write and how to teach the writing of introductions. I'm sure everybody's got a system for this where they have a general sentence which introduces the topic, then they address the question, and likely then they have their thesis statement, which will have a range of structures. When it moves on to the body paragraphs, however, this is where it gets a little bit chaotic. Typically, as you can see, I've got here in the slides, you've got your topic sentence, right? So they'll say something which will support their thesis, hopefully. And then after that, it gets a little bit blurry. It gets a bit more difficult to teach. And in my experience working with other teachers and teaching exam prep and academic prep, is that it goes a little bit like this. They give their position or their supporting idea, and then they support it with an example or a reason. And they use these common discourse markers, for example, in addition, or because. When we get students into a course, we'll often see that in their writing. And anyone who's worked in exam checking, you've probably seen that a lot as well. A lot of people are getting, they're getting in that band 6 IELTS area with their in additions and for example. And it's not wrong, but it's in some ways very limiting. And they're getting this quite a lot in their instruction. And I just kept having difficulty because I would often be giving feedback saying, okay, try to use more complex vocabulary, try to use more complex grammar. And even watching some of the more senior teachers with, very specific, try to use more if clauses, try to use noun clauses. And there's sort of this grammar approach to trying to improve their writing to get them to those scores. But of course, that's easier said than done. Now let's just look ahead here. Oop, gone a bit too far ahead there, sorry. All right, the common goals in writing. Now, I've made that mistake here of doing something I tell my students not to do in their presentations, and that's fill their slides with writing. So I'll give you a quick second just to look at that so that you can focus on both me and the slides. This is all information for the C1 level in the CEFR, which is approximately that 7 to 8 area or higher in IELTS. So you can see here that I've underlined reasons and relevant examples. And the reason for that is what I showed you in the previous slide, which said that the students are very capable of extending their ideas using because, or for example, or in addition. But as you can see, based on the criteria, that's really only a small part of what they're expected to do. So they're only talking about reasons and examples. But again, they need more controlled use of connectors, cohesive devices. They need to make subsidiary points. They need to make appropriate emphasis. They need more supporting detail, not just reasons and examples. And reasons and examples, it's a pretty clear connection with, for example, in addition, moreover. But what about these other more advanced forms like if and like, these other cohesive devices, or even ideas like although, even though, these grammar structures that we see less frequently in students' writing, especially when they're trying to get to that C1 level. So we're trying to get them to use this more advanced grammar. We're trying to get them to express more ideas, but what and how? Now, this gap in the grammar, this gap in the language can be filled with critical thinking, and that's what we are coming to now, is using critical thinking to fill out that paragraph, to take that body paragraph and fully extend their ideas, to fully explore what it is they're trying to express. So let's take a look at critical thinking. So a couple of quotes here from Diane Halpern. Now, one of the key ideas here is the structure inherent in thinking. And again, what is that structure? What are we trying to get them to do? We're trying to get some kind of structure into that body paragraph. As I said before, your introductions, I'm sure you've got these, very well-developed structures that you teach. Now, the question is, can you put some kind of structure into a body paragraph that goes beyond the topic sentence and, for example, and in addition? And then the second point, cognitive skills. So it's the actual thinking part that we need to get them to do. It's the actual playing with ideas. And the way to do that is asking questions. Now, you've seen the first one and you've dealt with the first one many times. What is an example? But look at some of the other questions that need to be asked. What would happen if? So speculation. A reversal of the idea that they're looking at. What will happen if we don't do this? What will happen if something else happens? What about the effect? The effect of what they're arguing. So if they're arguing against something, if they're arguing, say, a sort of academic topic might be, should governments pay for healthy school lunches for elementary school students? So, how would that affect them? How would eating healthier food affect the students in a positive way? How would not eating that, or how does not eating healthy food affect them? How do these relate to the problem? Again, connecting these ideas back to their topic sentence and back to their thesis. And a final point there, do we need to consider another point of view within that? So playing that devil's advocate role. And again, some of you might be already thinking, okay, these questions may push them to use some of that higher level grammar, but more importantly, extend their ideas. And that's what we're getting at. Eventually, you'll see how this all connects, but getting them to come up with the ideas that is going to lead to the better grammar. So, it's the idea that leads to the grammar, not the grammar that brings the idea. And that's what I was dealing with a lot when teaching was, giving grammatical feedback, but it's more that they need to extend their ideas. So, yeah, now that's one of the things. Now, some of you may have textbooks that you're working out of. I've worked out of a few IELTS textbooks. I've also used Pathways and the textbooks that we have here. Now, they might have these questions, but what happens with these questions often, and some of you might be able to relate to this, is that they're all contained on one page. So they might be doing a reading activity, and then there'll be a few questions, but then they move on. All right, so they kind of leave those behind. They do the activity one time, and a lot of times, the students don't go back in the book. So they might practice asking these questions or deal with it, but if they're not repeatedly doing this, if they're not doing it on a consistent basis, they don't develop that ability to extend ideas. So what I started doing in the last year is I've kind of combined these two ways of learning, and this rigorously drilling, right? So a lot of our students will come from a background where they have repetition as a way to improve. I've said east meets west here, but of course in both of, in all learning cultures, repetition is an important part of learning. So I've come to this approach of rigorously drilling critical thinking, and that's the repetitive action. So getting these students to every time there's a reading or every time there's a topic, get them to rigorously go through these questions. What is an example? What if? How will it affect it? Is this a problem? What could the solution be? And how does that solution relate back to the problem? Are there any problems with the solution? Things of that nature. So it's the repetition of this that will get them to develop these ideas and to make it natural. So again, if you think of the example when it comes to school lunches for healthy school lunches for elementary school students, are they thinking about that? Okay, what is the effect of that? What is the problem that it is solving? And then, any of these other questions that may come up, whether they're teacher generated, whether they're in the book, whether it's a, IELTS practice, getting them to talk about these with their classmates, getting them to talk about them with you. Now, it helps us to do three things. Now, when it comes to the criteria that you've got, that you're working with, whether it's IELTS, whether it's CEFR, whether it is, whatever it is you're working at your school. I'm just trying to get to the next slide, and I seem to be having some difficulty here. There we go. I say here, you're going to be hitting 3 birds with 1 stone when you focus on these questions. And I'll show you exactly how that's going to look in just a few minutes. But the beauty of what I've come up with here is that it really takes care of 3 problems you may be having. Now, by focusing on teaching the ideas and training the students to think about these things, you deal with task achievement first and foremost. So are they answering the question, and are they fully extending their answer? Now, if they do this, it's much more likely that you're going to see that type of complex grammar that you want. You're going to see that the even those, the ifs, the participle clauses. Now, whether or not they get it accurate or not is another question, but they will be attempting it, or they're more likely to attempt it because they've got a more extended idea and they've been practicing using it. This will also help a little bit more with cohesion. Now, that can be in a number of ways. Again, extending their ideas, one sentence flows to the next. So instead of going to in addition, or for example, or another example, they take one of their examples or one of their reasons, and they fully extend that instead of just trying to cut in with an example. I'm sure many of you have had students writing where they say, for example, but then the sentence only, it doesn't really naturally connect with the previous sentence that well. Also, in addition gets used in a variety of creative ways that I've seen. So they're often just trying to fit in something after the discourse marker that they use, that we train them to use oftentimes. So it should help us with those few areas. So it comes down to asking questions to develop the ideas, and then the other 2 ideas will stem from that. Now if I move to the next slide, which is, I seem to be having some technical difficulties. All right, so codify, consolidate, and simplify. So these questions we talk about. How do you get the students to do this on a regular basis? Now, the key problem with a lot of textbooks is that, they'll have certain activities on one page, but our students move forward. They don't go back. So consolidate these questions into one area that they can have with them at all times. And then, of course, sequence it. Is there a way to sequence it? Now, what I'm going to show you next is a handout I give my students every time I start a new class or every time I introduce writing. Whenever I teach an IELTS class, I do the same thing. I give the students this piece of paper. Anytime there's a warm-up speaking activity, whenever there's writing, and I get them to take out this paper, this flowchart, which I'll show you, and it just gives them the chance to think about these ideas and try to organize their thoughts. And even if they're not, producing answers, or if they're producing ideas, they're at least trying to. So they're trying to build that pathway. So this next piece of paper is something that I give my students. They always have it with them, and we take it out quite frequently. Oh, and that's too far. There. Oh, okay, now two of us. Okay, there we go. Sorry. So this is a flowchart. This is one that I made a few months ago. So I adapt them frequently. I make all sorts of changes. This just gets them to start developing their ideas. And I'll be quiet for just a minute, let everyone take a quick look at that. Okay. So, first of all, I can probably hear some of your eyes rolling when you see "I think" and "in my opinion." Now, just for the record, I do actively discourage a lot of my students from using "I think" and "in my opinion." But from a speaking perspective and just for getting them to talk in class, it just kind of helps them understand that that's what they're saying. So they just use that as a starting point. Then it goes on to so that's the first point, right? They give their position. Now, if this is that type of question where they have a position, so if they're thinking, again, that first question about school lunches, they might respond, yes, governments should provide free nutritious lunches to elementary school students. So they give their position, and I'm sure, that's easy enough to do. Then support. Now, of course, this is the thing that we often will see the students, perform quite well. The main reason is, or because, right? They should do this because students who eat healthily will be able to focus in class. And as I said, this is where oftentimes I'll see paragraphs just really get repetitive. They won't really get into detail. They won't really tell me very much. And so that's where the next steps. Now, whether or not they use them in their writing, it will just get the wheels turning in their head about how to extend their ideas. So what could happen? So you're asking the students, so if the students are focused, that was the main point, right? They eat healthy, they're focused. What could happen? So what's the result of this? What is the effect? Now, cohesively, this could be consequently, this could result in, or this could lead to. So they're using that linking language, the cohesive devices, to link to the next idea. Or another common one would be allowing or which allows. So this, allowing students to focus more when they study and get better grades. So this is kind of bottlenecking them into giving more detail. So again, a lot of our students might think, well, that's the end, right? If the students can focus better in class, that's the end of the story. But they can still take it further. And a lot of times I'm sure you've seen your students counting their words to make sure they make it to the word count. So this will help them to extend ideas fully. And again, when you look at the IELTS, the publicly available IELTS band scores, they do talk about that, right? Does the student fully extend their idea? Or even for that 9 level, right? There's no, they don't need to extend it anymore. It's been fully extended and it's fully coherent. So allowing, leading to, resulting in. So you've got an extended idea. You've possibly got your cohesive devices. And then look at that, allowing or resulting in. The students are now using, hopefully, participle clauses, at least when they're practicing with this, that they're exposed and they're seeing how that higher level grammar, that band 7 grammar that they're trying to get, can be used practically. Now, again, if you were to recreate this chart for your students, you can use a variety of structures here. This is one that I found, just very logically fits. Fourth, the devil's advocate. I always put that in. been told I should probably find a better word for that. But, you know, why would people disagree? So, you know, again, if it's the same argument about healthy school lunches, some people might respond with, well, you know, it's not fair to taxpayers, you know, because some people don't have children. So again, they're practicing this, they're thinking this. Now you could fill it in, no, and you should fill it in for them if they're struggling. You know, okay, some people might think that it's unfair to people who don't have children. However, in the future, you know, these same people may rely on taxes from those young, healthy people to pay for them in the future. So even though it's not their children, they will benefit. Or they might respond with, well, you know, kids who are healthy, you know, they do well in school, they're not going to get into trouble, right? There will be less delinquency, and a safer society benefits everybody. Again, right, even if the students aren't getting those ideas, they're at least making the effort to try and come up with these ideas. And as you practice, and again, you keep, I always keep this flow chart out, and then the students can always go back to it, and then, you know, fill in the ideas as well. It moves up to number 5, and again, you know, it doesn't have to hit all of these, but you try to get your students to look through these ideas. What if we do not do this? I mean, this is, I always kind of joke with my students, this is like a free sentence. Like, you can almost always use an if sentence in your body paragraph. If we don't have, you know, if we don't provide a healthy, you know, healthy food for the students, what's going to happen? Well, they'll perform poorly in school. They may have increased chances of delinquency, right? So different ways of expressing this. And of course, if can also be used to express effect. You know, if students eat healthy, they will perform better in school. In this case, I've got you know, more support, so they might really just go back to number 2, right? So they might say another reason is. That could be another paragraph. That could be, you know, or if, again, if this is for speaking that you're using this, you know, they just kind of keep talking and express another idea. 7, they conclude their point. This comes definitely back to writing. You know, remember, they need to conclude. They often need to conclude their point within the paragraph. At the end of the paragraph, they want to say something that says why this is so important. What I will often have written here, and I don't have it on this example, but it might say like therefore or thus. So, you know, therefore, it will actually save governments money if they provide school lunches. So, you know, if the students learn to be healthy, they won't need health care in the future. Therefore, it's actually cheaper to pay for lunches instead of paying for health care. So something to conclude the point. And remember, this is a key point in, you know, whether it's IELTS, whether it's academic prep, or just good writing. A paragraph should be one single idea. You know, a lot of times students will save their conclusion for the actual conclusion, but they need to be doing this within the paragraph. Why did they say all this? What does it mean? Common issue that comes up with conclusions is that, you know, they're not concluding it within the paragraph. So this helps them do that. So before they move on to their next idea, they conclude that point. You know, therefore, it's, you know, I mean, you know, again, the lazy answer might be, you know, for some of the lower level students, they might not need to just repeat their original position. Therefore, students, or therefore governments should pay for school lunches. But of course, then you encourage them to take that somewhere, you know, their original position plus something else. So, as I said, they may want to increase the number of. Sorry, what I mean is they want to. You know, they'll save money by paying for these lunches. This one is speaking, so I was using this in a speaking activity. So I also get them to think of these other things like taxes. Is it fair or unfair? Now, on a lot of academic topics, that may be an important issue. Is it fair to make people pay for things? You know, again, it depends on the topic. If this is speaking, they might look at personal feelings right over here at the bottom corner. And again, this gives them that ability to practice using those ideas, to be honest, to be frank. You know, and they could do a number of things with that, right? To be honest, I personally don't think it'll work, but I think it's the right idea. So again, it's all about the critical thinking, and it allows them to explore these different ideas. Now, as I said, this one is one that I use for speaking, just to get them critically thinking in class, right? They're asking themselves these questions and exploring the ideas. So this part's the critical thinking. And of course, this will help them when they're writing as well. A lot of times my students will just take out whatever flowchart I've given them, and they will just have it in front of them to remind them of, you know, the ideas. So instead of having their grammar books out, they just have this one piece of paper that gets them to generate their ideas. And, you know, I'm sure many of you have encountered that students just get to a point when they're studying English, when they get to that B2 or IELTS level 6, and they just keep struggling to get up to the next band score. And this is one area where I found it's really had some benefit. I will move on to another version of this flowchart that is specific to RMIT. All right, I need to go to the next slide. There we are. So this is for the critical response that we do here at RMIT. Now, I do apologize ahead of time. I'm not a graphic designer by any means. So you can probably see that it's you know, this is a Microsoft Word 101. Down here, these two arrows should go all the way up there. Now, what they have to do in this activity is read an article and then respond why they agree or disagree, or why, you know, then of course support that. So they have to identify a point in the text and say why this is a weakness in his argument or a strength. So I've modified it here. They first talk about the idea from the author, and then they put their position relative to it. So these first two sentences in the RMIT critical response will be quite similar, or sorry, quite standard. And you know, you can really like just put in whatever you want. I've got you know, the semicolon, this is a strength in the article, or comma, which is a weakness. So this allows you also to drill some of those, just those standard things that they might need in their writing to get, you know, to get those points. And again, there's an easy way to help them build their grammar. And you know, it may seem like it's actually teaching them, or just kind of, you know, they're going to memorize it and respond, or just, you know, regurgitate it on cue. Now that is something to deal with, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But I mean, this will help them. This is going to help them internalize how the grammar works, and it does require repetitions. In this case, we've got here number 3. They may briefly need to paraphrase, and then it moves on down towards number 4. They justify their position using their ideas. They go on up to number 5. They talk about any cause-effect relationships, and you can see I've got here allowing. This will all be available for you to take a look at later on, but as I said, you'd want to modify this to whatever your needs are. Possibly devil's advocate or the reversal. Again, that free if sentence. Also, I've just said they may just extend here, right? They just may talk about this and then move on to here. And that will happen. I mean, it's really amazing when the students use this, they start becoming quite creative, and, you know, they'll start coming up with their own ideas that, you know, might lead you to actually make changes to your flowchart if you use a similar technique. So a lot of times, just using that structure will allow the students to start developing their own creative ideas. I'll move on to the next one here, or at least I'll try to. This is another activity I do. I will just give my students, I'll just give them like a question, what's one of the examples? You know, should sugary drinks be taxed higher? Right? Should the government tax, sugared drinks? And then you just get them to work together, and they can write their ideas down. So they might say yes or no, then they'll support it with some ideas, they'll discuss the cause and effect, they just write down these ideas. So it's another way to just take the flowchart and stretch it lengthwise. That's one activity I'll often do with my students. Now, I'll show you an example of a student I taught about a year ago. And this was after about 2 or 3 weeks, I was working with him on his writing. This was in a full class. I'd put him perhaps around that IELTS 5 or 5.5 when he first got into the class. You can look a bit more carefully at this a bit later if you wish, but you can see I've just underlined what's happened here. He's stated the point and his position. So the question was about whether or not governments should monitor international student agents. I'm sure a topic you may be familiar with. And here he said that the government should monitor agents, and this is a strength in the article. He then goes on to support the idea with the main point. He talks about the effect. He goes on to speculate. So this is an example where he's done something different. I initially just said, oh yeah, just say like, if they don't, this will happen. But here he's actually speculated as to how it might affect things in the country. He's used although, and then he's ended with hence. Now, to be frank with you, this was a bit formulaic and a bit robotic, and it was a good response. It gave me a lot to work with, but you can see here the student's taken the flowchart and he's really just tried to use it quite verbatim. Now, that's up to you what you might think of that. Some of you might look at this and say, okay, there's not a lot of spirit in this, but again, this will give you more to work with when you're giving feedback. The student's able to then demonstrate the grammar a bit better. Again, it just depends on how you want to look at this. But this student has, made a much clearer attempt to extend his ideas. I just want to be conscious of the time. I think this is, so I'm going to move on to the next example. We've got a before, and I'll show you the after in just a couple of minutes. Now you can see here, you can read over that quickly. Basically, you can really see that they're simple sentences. These are mostly short sentences with a single subject-verb agreement, and they're using those common linkers in addition. Nowadays, some of these cliches that we see a lot. And again, short sentences. Now, the student's vocabulary was quite good, I would say, and the grammar is quite accurate. The only issue is it doesn't quite have that same complexity needed to get that higher score that she wants. Now, if we go to the next one, about 3 weeks later after practicing, there's a bit of a change. There's actually quite a bit of change. Here, there's multiple complex sentences with multiple subject-verb agreements. We've got if clauses. We've got participle clauses. So this student has been able to take their, take what they've written or take their ideas, take that grammatical accuracy, but now extend the complexity, which they do need. They need to show that range of sentence structures in order to get those higher scores, and of course, to more adequately express their ideas and more concisely express their ideas. So I am teaching a bit to a formula, but as I said, it gives you more to work with from your students. Of course, it gives them something that they can stick to, some kind of structure that they can practice and feel like they're doing something, as opposed to just getting that, needs more grammar, needs more extending. So that's the thing, is you can even see in that piece of feedback that I've given, you could still extend. Now, the student is talking about genetically modified food, and she's talking about how it could decrease the productivity of the crops. And I was saying, you could even extend this. What would the consequence be for the people? So the flowchart that I've been using also helps me give specific feedback. So instead of just saying extend or why or how, you can give, you could either be specific like I have and say, this could have consequences for the people too, right? And that's important. The student gets that feedback. And then they're able to think about that if they rewrite this or if they write another one. So you're part of that process of showing them how to critically think, showing them how to extend their ideas. So again, you see here more extended ideas, less common discourse markers, and greater range of sentence structures, right? And this student's done a fairly good job, and I actually do believe she went on to get that higher score that she needed. So bravo for her. Anyhow, that's kind of bringing me to the end here, and I just wanted to talk about a few things, the keys to teaching from the, I guess from the book of Arnold Schwarzenegger, reps, reps, reps. The main thing is they need to repeat this activity. They need to do it a few times. Well, they could do it daily. I always have this paper out in a 10-week course. My students always have it usually at the front of their binder. The process, allow them to resubmit. I mean, the way you do writing feedback, I know it's going to vary for everyone out there. I usually get them to resubmit. Sometimes I give them full corrections, sometimes I don't. But, it depends. If they have difficulty with ideas, let this guide the questions, right? What will the result be? What could this result, what could happen? What if they don't? Let them be confused. That's another key point. They're not going to get it the first day. Some of them will, others won't. But the main thing is that they have to go through that process of, trying at least, like get the wheels turning. And over a period of a few weeks, you'll see some big differences. Modify as necessary. You all work in different contexts with different tasks that need to be done. The flowchart is what, that's the format I use. If you make something similar, just, develop it depending on what they need it for. Unintended outcomes. Of course, that's, the main thing that you want, right? You want to see them start developing their own ideas. You want to see them using unexpected ways of analyzing something. And the last one there is mitigate the risks, and that was from the first example I talked about. just make sure that they, after a few weeks, that they don't keep on just using it. And I've had a few students where I would see although and resulting in, but then the ideas weren't that well connected. It's a bit of an issue, but it's something that it's easy to deal with, and as I was saying, it gives you more to work with. Moving on, the benefits to the student. This is much easier for them to wrap their heads around. A lot when I was doing this presentation before, a lot of the teachers just came up to me and said, "It's great. The students, this is actually something the students that's tangible for them, and they can really." Wrap their heads around it. They can repeat it. They can practice it. It's got clear goals. Grammar. I know a lot of you probably don't have a huge grammar content, but this gives you, 4, maybe 5 structures that you can really focus on, which they really do need. Especially, I'm particularly fond of getting those participle clauses into their writing, and that's just the main thing, right? They focus on the ideas, and then the grammar comes so much easier that way. Benefits to the teacher, it helps you elicit from the students a lot easier. You can guide their discussions better. It helps you ask them questions to get them to come to these conclusions. It's really wonderful for getting that Socratic method, right, where it just guides you in how you ask them questions to get them there. And of course, whenever they're doing reading, if you ever give them articles to read, it helps them fit it into a paradigm. So if they're reading something about health and nutrition, they can then fit it into their ideas more easily. They can start developing their positions on things in general. I'm sure many of you have had students who just haven't spent a lot of time thinking about their positions. Predictable errors for you. This actually makes things a bit easier for you. You're going to get just when you get the writing, it's a lot easier to follow what they're trying to do. And of course, it's a paradigm for you to give feedback, right? Instead of just extend or needs more or whatever it is, you can be more specific. What could result from this? And as I said, it's easier to teach grammar. A lot of books I've worked with have grammar in various chapters, but there's not necessarily a clear way to fit that into their speaking or writing. Or if there is, again, you do it on page 36, and then it's gone. That brings me to the end. Those are the 2 books I've looked at. Yes, and that really brings us to the end. So as I was saying, it's really been quite helpful for a lot of my students. Again, we have so many strategies for introductions, but body paragraphs are where the critical thinking really comes in. and hopefully, a lot of the teachers here where I'm working, they're using this structure. Students, I've gotten quite positive feedback. Yeah, and I guess the floor is open to questions, and I'm happy to field any questions.
Okay, great, thank you. I'll just explain the questions. If you just type them in, I'm the only one who can see all of the questions, but I'll relay them to the presenter. So just typing in any questions you may have. Okay, I can't see any questions.
Oh,
so
no.
if you do, no, there were some before, so I can go back to them. But if you do have any questions for the presenter, please ask them. Okay, I'll go back to some of the ones that were going on while you were speaking.
Ah, okay.
Someone's asked quite a philosophical question. What do we exactly mean by critical thinking? But I think that's a good one.
Yeah. So critical think, in this case, what I'm talking about here is how they, when they get a question, when they get a position, how they respond to that. So it's the idea of whether or not they're going to take the idea and say why it works or why it doesn't work. That is a very good philosophical question. So it's just about how they take the idea and extend it. How, they don't just say, okay, because a lot of times in these academic prep courses, or at least the one that I've been teaching, they have to read a text and they have to have a reaction to it. So why is it that they're agreeing or disagreeing? Now, yes, I suppose at a certain point critical thinking is going to take them to that point where they have to try and, reject their own ideas. But in this case, I suppose it's more of a first step where they're looking at something and they're responding by, well, as I said, either saying, okay, well, I support this and moving forward with it, or saying, well, no, but what about this? What about this? So it's just about looking at different angles to a position or to an idea.
Okay.
That's how I would put it, yeah.
Okay, great. Tim has asked, how have you found these strategies work at pre-intermediate level in general English?
Well, to be frank, I haven't used them in pre-intermediate.
Somebody else has asked.
How would that go?
Yeah, someone else has asked if you've tried it with students at a lower IELTS band. So how low? So they're quite similar questions, I think, using it with lower students.
Yeah, lower levels. I've used it with around that like level 5, like IELTS band score 5. I think with lower levels, I mean, it really depends because it's based on getting them to respond to something. So if English isn't their first language, that might be a bit tricky because you need to get them to be reading these ideas, which may be political in nature, which may be economic in nature. To be frank, that's a good question. I mean, if anyone's tried it, I'd love to hear from them because that's something I, could think about. I generally don't deal a lot with the lower levels. I guess, no, okay, I did have one student who was around level, he got a 4 in his writing in IELTS with both a heavy diet of extensive reading and with giving him writing feedback based on this flowchart. He got up to a 6 in 2 months with very little face-to-face time. So, yes, it will work, not alone, right? You have to get them to become quite voracious readers because they do need to get that input as well. So that's the only experience I've had where I combined it with reading and you had that, very I don't know. I would say 2 bands in 2 months is pretty good. So it can work, but it doesn't work. I'd say you have to definitely combine that with other activities, including extensive reading, and in that case it was graded readers, and also once he realized how helpful that was, the extensive readers, he started reading the newspaper. So I'd say it can work. Pre-intermediate, I'm not sure what the level exactly, but as I said, if they're looking at like a 4 in IELTS, which I don't know if that's pre-intermediate, it's more of an intermediate level, or maybe pre-intermediate, it could work. It could work. But again, as long as there's a structure that they're working within. I think, if their goal is working in academic or IELTS, then yes, this can work. But as I said, I only have the one reference.
Okay. Paul has asked or has commented, you've talked a lot about grammar and functional language. Where does vocabulary or lexis fit into your approach?
It doesn't. I mean, unfortunately, that's the one weakness of the area. Well, not really a weakness. It's just there's not really much you can do there. The only thing I would say is that it's going to be sort of a side effect. Is that again, if they're reading more, if you get them reading more and they're able to sort of incorporate ideas, they're more likely to remember the vocabulary. Yeah, I know that's definitely something that doesn't quite fit into this because, well, I mean, either they know the words or they don't. But I mean, it's just the point that by going through these ideas, by asking themselves these questions, they're exercising that brain muscle a bit more. I generally find an increase or an improvement in vocabulary typically just comes with the territory, but it's not something that's directly dealt with through this method.
Okay. There's a few questions. I guess you spoke about IELTS quite a bit as some of your examples.
Yeah.
A few people have asked how this would work for EAP writing.
It depends, because I know there's different EAP programs out there, and I don't know what all of them do. But I know that a lot of the EAP course books will have these, essay questions that are quite similar to IELTS. So again, if they're simply trying to support their positions, then it should work just the same. If it's like a standard essay in that sort of IELTS or TOEFL or PTE format, then they have their position, and then they use this to extend their ideas and to bring in their ideas. If the topics are different, so again, here we have critical responses where they have to respond directly to a text using their own ideas and their own previous knowledge, you reformat it. Like you just have to have to figure out, okay, what kind of questions and how would I organize them. So if you look back at the slides and you see that one that had the critical response flowchart, I just designed it to consider what they needed to do. So I can't speak to the different EAP programs out there, but if it's a standard essay, then it really doesn't need to look very different from the hand-drawn one where they state their position, they support, and they talk about if cause, effect, and devil's advocate. I mean, if you were going to do a flowchart for a body paragraph, you would just really probably take out the "in my opinion." You just start with the main reason or the first reason.
Okay. Somebody has asked how long it would normally take students to internalize these questions and this way of thinking.
Some of them instantly. Some of them it takes a few weeks. It really depends. Some of them, it depends on their background. But you'll find if you get I've had a few students who, they're clearly quite quick. They're clearly quite smart. They just need a little bit of structure to get there. And so I've had students turn around in days, and I've had, and then other students will take weeks, and then some students, it depends on their motivation level. I should also point out one nice thing about this is you will see it in their writing. You will see like the DNA of this come into their writing. In a class I taught recently, it was actually quite nice because you could tell that everyone had done this take-home assignment. I mean, it was an authentic assignment. I don't know. Once in a while, you may have an issue with students getting a ghostwriter for a take-home assignment, and you can really tell that that's not the case when the students have been using a structure that you teach in class that follows that, because they know that they're using the right language. But yeah, it will depend on the student. That's all I can really say.
Okay. Sylvia's asked how you deal with students who are just not interested in writing.
Isn't that always the question?
I think she wants your pearls of wisdom.
Pearls of wisdom. Yeah, I mean, as far as, I don't know. I mean, I think that just comes down to the magic of the classroom, I guess. I'm not really. I mean, either I motivate them or I don't, and if they're just not into it, I'm not really sure what can be done about that.
Okay.
I wish I had a better answer for that.
All right, and the final question, Alla has asked, if students use your chart with obvious success, do you think that it could slow down their development of their individual writing style?
Again, the classic response, it depends. I haven't seen it create too many problems with that. That first example I did show, that was a case where I felt like that was happening. So they were structuring, they were basically just trying to use this connective language without really thinking through their ideas. A lot of students, some of the students I find they will, they'll use it, but then they'll surpass it. Like they'll just move on, and they'll be fine. They'll find their own way. So they'll just use this as a springboard to really develop their own style. So
it's a scaffolding step.
Yeah, it's a scaffolding step. But I unfortunately have seen some students who, when I've seen their writing a little bit later, it actually showed no evidence of any kind of thoughtful structure. So is it going to solve everything? No. Is it going to give a lot of them something better to structure their ideas around? Yeah, absolutely. And I have seen some students go on to get 7.5s and 8s and higher. Well, and 8.5, no higher than that, but get those higher scores in their writing, and they're not going to be pulling those scores just by just because they're using the correct words, right? So it is a bit of them involved, and again, that's something you manage, that I manage, and that you would manage as the teacher in the classroom. I mean, that's just through your mentoring, through your guidance, that they can improve. But as I said, this is a tool that I use that can be effective. And then, as I said, for some students who struggle, this will help them get through. For some students, this is going to help them excel.
All right, well, we'll finish there. I'd just like to say thank you to Mark, the presenter. In the words of one of our attendees who's written a comment for Claire McGrath, she said, "Thank you very much. It was straightforward and very practical." So, and a few other people have said that they've enjoyed it. So thank you, Mark.
Oh, great. Well, I'm happy to hear that.
Some people have asked if they can get their hands on the flowcharts. The answer to that is yes, I'll be uploading the slides and the recording to the English Australia website tomorrow, and the slides obviously have the flowcharts on them.
Yeah, as I said, please go ahead and use them. Just keep in mind, I would just say, I redevelop them every couple of weeks. I rejig them, so that's the main thing.
Wonderful. There's lots of thank yous and great. Thanks, Mark.
Great.
And really enjoyed it coming through. Okay, well, we'll leave it there. Thank you again, and thank you to all our attendees.